Good morning. Welcome to our walk through the Bible devotional for today, January the 4th. Hope you're having a blessed day. Hopefully, this helps your morning start off right. Now, remember, this is a supplemental to what you have already read. So, hopefully, you've read it. If you haven't, pause the video and then come back to it after you've done the reading. Otherwise, it might not make sense. So, one of the ways that we tell whether a person is a person of good character that has integrity is the way that they follow up on promises. Are they a person of their word? When they say something, do they mean it? That was used ironically in the movie Hook when Robin Williams' character said, "My word is my bond," and then he actually never kept his word. But we'd all like to think that we're people of character, that we keep our promises, but reality is we don't always. As a parent, I can ashamedly say there's been times when I told my kids we're going to do something, and then they remind me later that it never happened. And that's a bit of an embarrassment. But fortunately, we have a God who always keeps his promises. See, this is one of the things that's beautiful about God is that he is never changing. He is what he was yesterday, he will be today, and he will be forever. And so when God makes a promise to someone, it's something that we need to pay attention to. And in our readings today, in Genesis chapter 8, we see God make a covenant with Noah. And now we all know what the end result of this covenant was. Starting in chapter 8, at the bottom of it, he talks about how he will never do this again. And then in in chapter 9, he makes it specifically. In chapter 9, verse 9, he says, "I will now establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you." Now, we all know the rainbow is the sign of the covenant. But here's the interesting thing about promises when God makes them. See, the Bible is full of instances when people make promises. But when God makes a promise, there's only one person involved in the promise. In other words, God doesn't promise something to someone and expect them to uphold their end of the promise. God recognizes that we can't do that. Instead, God makes a promise with himself. So in verse 9, he says, "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth, I will establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." Now, God didn't tell Noah that there was any stipulations to it. Hey, if you do this, then I promise I won't do that. That was never the case. This was a covenant that God made with himself, and he just said, "I'm not going to do it." Now, as we walk through the Bible, we're going to see God make covenants with several other people. We're going to see him make one with Abraham. We're going to see him make one with David. We're going to see him make one with the people of Israel through Isaiah. But ultimately, the covenants are going to be fulfilled by, well, you guessed it, Jesus. And that's one of the beautiful things about Matthew is that we see Jesus is fulfilling the promises that God has made. And that is something that we should never take lightly or ever forget. So when Jesus in Matthew chapter 4 starts preaching, he's fulfilling a covenant. When he starts healing, he's fulfilling the covenant. All of the things that Jesus does are to meet the expectations and requirements that God placed on himself. Not on us, but on himself. I love what David says in our reading today in Psalm 4 when he says, "You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." See, God hears our prayers not because of us, but because of who he is. As followers of Christ, there's nothing that we can do that would earn our way into being heard from God. Instead, only by the promises that God has made are we able to be heard by him. And that's a beautiful thought and a beautiful thing to see. So when God says, "I'm going to set up this sign of a covenant I've established between me and all life on earth," we can know that we are a part of that covenant. And no matter who tries to appropriate what or does anything, anytime that you see this promise in the sky, you can remember that God keeps his promises because he is a God who never changes. He's a God who is the same yesterday, today, and for eternity. May you have a blessed day thanks to the promises of God.